Okay, I will just start because if I will wait until more people will show up that might be on the list that would attend this talk, I will probably end up late and people will then start queuing up the door and want us to get out. If you don't know me, my name is Theo van Hoezel from the Netherlands. I've been here last time for another presentation about number of fractions. This talk will be has a nice inspiration title, I would think so, but don't expect me to come up with quotes from Talking Heads as much as I would like to do. It's a nice band, has a lot of nice lyrics in it, but nah, I can't do that anymore. So let's stick with what I have. Talking Heads, REST APIs don't need to be your psycho killer. It will be a little bit about Dancer 2, the lightweight web framework. Does, well, nothing wrong. There are a lot of things it doesn't do either. It's just very lightweight, and it leaves out a lot of things that actually are written down in the RFCs. And I talked with Sawyer last week, and he said, Theo, you're right, a lot of things you're talking about are actually not in Dancer. We just walk around them and we skip them. We should stick more to the RFCs. So I hope that a lot of things that are being discussed here, shown here to you, will not be plugins in half a year, but will be core Dancer at that time. I hope so. Dancer 2, HTTP protocols and RFCs. It's a lot about what you must do, what you should do, may do, should not do. And reading those RFCs is usually a horrible thing. You don't like to do that. You just want to get on. We download a module and said, okay, let's trust in it. Somebody will have done their homework. But somebody has done his homework is not the best thing to trust. Anyways, I found out again. So, a little overview. HTTP. I think I can skip most of that part. A lot of people already talked about the HTTP standards. A little bit about Dancer. Then the areas I will cover are caching, conditional requests, content accusations, and authorizations. 4 scenarios described in the RFCs that are particular for writing APIs and how to make sure your APIs do what your client and server should do concerning them. Okay. The HTTP 1 protocol. It's a lot about requests, responses, and all these things you see on your slides. We know all about the HTTP 1 protocol. It has a request, it has a request line, it has a header with some stuff in it. Most of this is familiar to everybody by now, or should I go into detail now? I don't go into detail. Okay, let's skip this whole thing. Some content. Then the response. Well, yeah, I think a lot of the response goes here in the response status line. If you don't pay attention to these things, what a lot of frameworks don't do, then you write clients that will get results back, and you don't know how to deal with the response from your client, from your server. So I will focus a little bit on these things here. This will be very important as well. Just in general, the response header. There's a lot of information going in your response header that likes your client to know. And we just put it in it because we rely on our people's homework. An empty line and the content itself. The familiar methods: get, push, post, delete, head. Well, who uses head? Options. I think we should use options way more. And a method patch. Yeah, I sometimes wonder why we have patch. We can do a lot of things with the normal puts, and I try to open up the discussions with the people that wrote the RFCs about patch and said, yeah, you could do it with puts, but we prefer the complex patch thing as well. So, it's there, and well, maybe we should use it. Okay. The header fields, I name here a few of them, and I hope you more or less see the mirror side of each other. We have on the request side the host, and the response side you have location. We have a user agent on one side, the server side. We have things like if modified since, and I hope the server responds with the last modification dates. And well, we have content types on both sides. But don't mistake content type for something that Dancer people like to use content type for. I will come back to that later. The status codes, we have a lot of them, grouped in 5 series. For websites, we love to make all these fancy things. I think they're nice to do. Unfortunately, for writing APIs, nobody will see these things. So we have these 100 things. Who cares about these? I will skip them. For writing APIs, you will probably never see them. These ones, I think they are quite important if you do any request. I hope you will get one of these 4 back. That's what you're aiming for, isn't it? Then we have these, the multiple choices. For if you get something from your server back where the server says, I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean, but choose any of these URLs and you will be fine. Move permanently. Not sure where they will come up with your APIs, but it's one of them. The not modified one actually is one that you should consider, I think. Then here's a whole list of client errors. We'll come back later to these, and I haven't mentioned the whole extensive list of all the errors that you can get. And then we have, of course, these. Probably not something you will find when writing your API server at that moment. No, that's higher level stuff that should be taken care of somewhere else. Although the 501 might be something that could be useful if you do something very stupid. But actually, if you think that not implemented is to say, well, sorry, you used a get or you used a patch, for example. Patch is actually something that your server may not know how to, your software, your module may not know how to handle it, your API, but patch is something that your server should be able to handle. So you should not return a not implemented. The not implemented things is not for things that Dancer can't handle. Not implemented is if you just write a new method, like link or unlink. Are they new? Well, they used to be there, and I hope they will be back again soon, because they're very useful. We didn't know what to do in the 90s with it, so because we didn't know what to do with it, we skipped them, we moved them out of the RFCs, and now we want them back. Oh, it's waiting for that. Okay, a little bit about Dancer, and a little bit about, well, for example, LWP, because to have a server and a client, you need just 2, isn't it? It's 2 to tango. So, this is a little Dancer application I have here for people that are not familiar with Dancer. It's very simple. Just use the module. Here you have a route entry. It will have the verb get. You can change other things there. There are things like put post. You can do the options things, head, or you can use any. That will do any of the verbs. And it's of course followed by well, something that looks like a path and an identifier at this moment. Then it will do something useful. It will retrieve the data for this user with a parameter from ID. And then Dancer has built-in stuff to just render the HTML. And the last thing, just start dancing. Well, that's a client-server situation for Dancer. And here's something very, very little how you can write a client. There are more things to test your APIs. I hardly do this stuff. I found a very nice application for my Macintosh, for my Apple computer. It's called Paul. Paul will be very useful if you want to test your APIs. It will have the options to do any headers inside it, and will show you very neat The responses come back either in HTML, JSON, XML, and all these things will be nicely formatted instead of using the command line curl stuff. All right. Now, one of the 4 scenarios. Caching. Caching is something we invented years ago, and there's a big part of caching that's taken care of you by either your server. Apache will have your ways to handle with requests, and especially with static content, it's very easy to implement caching. However, if you're doing APIs and you're doing a lot of things with dynamic content, usually, caching is not something that your server can handle all the time. Your application needs to handle it. So, we use caching not only to reduce the cost, but also to improve responsiveness. If you want to write a nice iPhone application or another mobile application, try to make sure that as much data you cache on your mobile device, because not doing so makes it just a lot of requests you should not make. Try to handle that. But in order to handle it, you need to help your client a little bit. Now, caching happens on 3 sides. On your device, your browser, your mobile phone. It can happen in a very nasty place where it's a little bit tricky, the public proxies, where luckily a lot of things do happen for you for any heavy content you need from your browser or very frequent downloads that are available on the internet. Luckily your internet provider will do the proxies, which speed up a lot of stuff. And then you have the server side, like I just mentioned. And all 3 have their own difficulties. I will not go into too much detail of them, but here is a little bit you can see if you want to do something with caching. It will come back with you will do a get with a username, and what you should do more or less is, okay, give me only the result back if it's modified since. Well, this is a little late date, but yeah, modified since. Don't forget, by the way, to format the data correctly. Don't use ISO 8601 or something like that. Don't do that. This is the only format it should respond to. I made that question mistake a few times. Why doesn't it work? Yeah. And what will come back from your server is actually maybe a status code of 3 or 4. It has to be modified. That would be a wonderful thing. And your server can be very fast, say, oh, say, I have my last modified date checked for you. There's nothing happened, so here you go back. If not a 3 or 4 comes back from your server, it should have some content, I hope. And it will have your last modified date. It's very important at the moment. Don't neglect it. You can have a age, so how long can it reside in your proxy server? An expire date. It will give you just a date before it should expire. And then the last line here, the cache control mechanisms. Don't forget about them. I spoke just briefly about the proxy server and the public. Well, a lot of your requests might have confidential data in it. You don't want to have that in a public proxy. So make sure if you do something with that and you have dynamic content and you have authorization things inside it, make sure you do use the private cache control. And it would be very useful if you pay a little attention when you're generating your request to have a max age, or maybe if you were sure that your content is very rapidly changing, you do maybe a no cache at all. Make sure you do those things because it will help to make your caches work properly. Now, having said that, it's very hard to find a proper client in the Perl libraries that will actually handle caches properly. LWP does have some nice user agents, some do caching, but if you start looking at the code, then you're thinking, no, something is missing here. Again, people wrote something quickly, a fix for something they needed, so please pay a little bit attention to writing your clients that you actually do handle all these different things. Conditional requests. The second scenario I would like to talk about. If you write a RESTful application, you have to think about, and actually not only REST, the whole HTTP should be stateless. That means there is nothing on the server that will remember what you have done. You come back with one request, it comes back with a response, and it has already forgotten who you are, where you came from, or whatever. That's going to be a little bit tricky if you want to update your data on your server. You might be one client, another client will be there and accessing the same data. If you have a normal database, you might do some record locking there. But like I said, it's stateless. The server does not know about what's going to happen. It will not lock your records. So you need to have those race conditions where two clients were trying to update both at the same time. You need to make sure some things work there that can't do those things. So one of the things you could do is make sure that you only update your resources if those have not been updated since the last time they have been modified, or last time you made a request. And of course, you should only do the thing if that resource actually still exists, those things. Here is a very small thing for conditional request. Let's say you want to delete a user. Well, you should make sure that in your client you will put in something like a if unmodified since. You do not want to delete that resource if somebody else has just gotten in between it and changed it. Will your client handle those things? Be careful. The other one, not only the if unmodified since, the other one is a e-tag. The e-tags are a, well, very encrypted thing there. Whatever you put in it, it can be just the normal string. If you have very small resources, which come only back with a name, or a very tiny record, you can just take the whole record string, no problem. If you have huge resources, you might do a MD5 hash over it, and you will get these kind of things. So the moment you change your contents of your database, and you do this call, the server will have to check if your content at this moment in the server has not been changed. So you do again that MD5 hash over your content. Your client comes in with this request, and if both are still the same, you're probably still working on the same resource and the same version of that resource. Then if those two still match, you can go ahead. If they don't match, stop your request and say, goodbye client, do something else. So, for conditional requests, the first thing there is the so-called precondition fill, the things that I just said, if unmodified since and if match things. If those two are either false, you come back with a response that says, sorry, client, it doesn't work this way. We have changed your data. I'm not going to do this for you. The other one, actually very important, I think, is that your server is capable of telling your client, sorry, we have made some security things inside our server. We want you to provide those preconditions. Otherwise, you could write a client that says, oh yeah, I just want to delete this record. The moment you are going to use these preconditions, just let your client know that I'm fine to do that, but tell me, please, I want these headers, either if modified since, or unmodified since, or the if matched e-tag. So make sure you build in those things. Otherwise, your clients can just do whatever it wants. And these things like the last modified and the e-tag, return those things to your client. Don't just render your data without a last modified. And please try to make some kind of e-tag. Like I said, you can just use anything, any string that will uniquely identify the content of your resource with this e-tag. MD5 is very useful at that moment. This thing, content negotiation. I will take a little bit more about this one. By the way, any questions first about the last two topics I covered, caching or conditional request? Not so far? Okay, I'll call it here. Content negotiation, something that people like to avoid in very nasty ways. We have our so-called Uniforce Resource Identifier. We know them very well from our browser when you type in those things. And we can put in a lot of stuff in there. But actually, it's only something that is supposed to identify a resource. How that resource looks like, that's not something that's actually important for the resource itself. If I'd like to create a resource that comes back as a PNG file, why should I not be able to have a user profile and say I want the user profile back either in JSON, that's just a representation of your user profile. I can have that same resource back as an XML file, or I can use a HTML representation. Not very useful in APIs, but whatever, you can do that. Or you can say, I want a PNG back from this user profile. Well, it might be your tiny thumbnail thing of your picture. Or you can make whatever things. So we are going to talk about a little bit these resource things, identifiers. Don't put in the resource headers the way you want your character sets, your language, your format, or your encoding of those. They're not supposed to be there. We do it, but okay. So basically, content negotiation is using 4 accept headers. The accept header itself, that will more or less try to tell you, no, I should rephrase it. The accept header field itself is going to tell the server what it likes to accept. The language, accept language, is one that I have simplified those examples here. We could have English underscore US there. We could have English underscore is it UK or GB? GB. I made that mistake once. Whatever you put there, you can specify your language there, and you can specify any character sets there. It will go back to the awful ISO 8601, no, 85, whatever. A nasty ISO character sets if you don't specify them. And the encodings use gzip or plain or whatever things you want to return there. Those things can go into your request headers, not in your URLs. Like I just said, a URL is just an identifier of the resource, not how you should represent it. Yeah. The tricky thing about content negotiation. The client can say, I'd like to have these. But if your client doesn't speak Chinese, wants Chinese, and your server only speaks English, you have a problem. If your client wants to have a PNG file, and you do not know how to handle images as a server, again you have a problem. Either way, depending on how that whole accept header is being built up, you can have clients that say, well, I'd like to have it in this order, I most preferably prefer this language, or I most prefer this kind of content, and well, then if you can't do that, give me another content type, and if you can't do that, I'll be fine with anything. or anything from this type, or some clients may even say, oh, sorry, I want this specifically, and anything else I don't want. So you need to be a little careful about the whole preferences from the client and what the server can do. So, content negotiation in Dancer. Dancer has a very nice way to handle content negotiation. One of the ways it can handle it is the very simple thing like plug in a mutable serializer. You will go into your Dancer route with that user ID thing, you will retrieve the whole user data, and then you can simply say return $user info. Depending on what is your client actually asking for, how that request is being built up with the headers, supposedly it will either return JSON, XML, YAML, dumper, and I'm not sure if it will return HTML, but okay. Anyways, this is how you would do that. You can, in your client, you say just accept application is JSON. And it will nicely return JSON back. This, however, if I put this in my request headers, content type application / XML, Dancer 2 mutable serializer will go wrong. Somehow it thinks that your content type of your request, so what's in the content of your request, the body there, if you say that's application XML, mutable serializer thinks that you want XML back as well. But you explicitly say, I want application JSON back. So be careful, it will fool you there. I go back my slides, let's go forward. Okay, so let's try it a little bit different. Instead of having mutable serializer work through that, you can check your parameters and check your accept headers and see what's in your accept headers. You do some grep over it, because it can all have different kind of content there. So you can do this and, well, it will work. It will check, is it the text / HTML? You will get the template back. Is it the JSON? You will return the JSON. And is it an application / XML? You will return the XML. So, what will happen? This will work properly. You say application JSON. Yay, it will return your JSON. Now, there it goes. In your Dancer route, it will find this thing here in the number 3 of your switch thing here. What will happen if I do this? I will say in my client, I'd like to use application / XML with a Q factor of 0.1. That's a very low preference. It says, well, if you can't find anything else, okay, I will take the XML file, but I prefer actually text / HTML, although it doesn't have a Q factor behind it. It means it has a Q value of 1, the highest, by default. So, this is going to happen. It finds the text / HTML as the first one, so what will it do? It will return your HTML. Now, that doesn't work, so it does work for one content type, one accept header field, and it will go wrong if you have complex things there. It can be very messy in the content negotiation. Like I said already, you can have different Q values, and it says here like fine with text in plain, prefer HTML, and anything else, I don't want it at all. Try to implement that in Dancer. Okay, this is how you implement it in Dancer too. I wrote a plugin, my first plugin ever that I've solely launched on CPAN, proper plugin. Proper upload to CPAN. What will it do? Well, you just load that plugin there, content negotiation, and I think quite nice syntax I wrote there. It will have some kind of switch statement here. HTTP underscore choose underscore accept, and it will just check either if you have a text HTML, an application JSON, or an application XML. And it will do the right thing for you. It can do these. If you have multiple MIME types that are actually complete the same for your application, you can do these things. It will accept image PNG, JPEG, or GIF, and you will do some image magic stuff with it, and you can do the HTTP accept minor method that will tell you just the last part of your accept MIME type thing. So it will give you the PNG, JPEG, and GIF. And hopefully ImageMagick will be able to generate that nice image for you. So what does it do? Not yet. It does not yet return the status 300 multiple choices, but it will. When do you need those 300 messages? That's the time that your server simply cannot figure out what the client wants. It doesn't specify, for example, which MIME type it likes. If it doesn't specify it, and your server does not have any preference at all to say, well, if you don't say what you want, I will give you back HTML, then it has to go back to the server, to the client and say, client, I have options for you. Would you please choose either one of these 3 URLs? And this is the moment where your URL will more or less start to include that so-called dot format at the end of your URL. Say you have your user profile .png, or you have your user profile .json, or user profile .xml. You start to specify what kind of content you want back. Not the most kind way, but it's just an escape route. I mean, you shouldn't have that in the first place. The other thing is we like to have multiple choices if you have content in multiple languages. We usually say, okay, you know what, we have our path of our server and we just insert the language in front of it. Either lowercase or uppercase things, but prefer lowercase. But again, it should not be there, but it's an escape route. If you have multiple languages and the client can't tell you what to do, return this. Now, the one thing I did skip a little is that 406 status not acceptable. You might have seen my wearing this sweater for a while away. When do you return a not acceptable? That's known that the client says, I want PNG back, or I want JSON back, and the server says, sorry, I don't have it for you. And I don't have any alternatives, and you don't want any alternatives, so here you go, 406, it's not an acceptable thing. Then, the last one here, vary. A response header, you might think, oh, what does it do there? Well, the moment you start having different representations of your resources, you get in trouble with your proxies and your caching systems. What's going to happen here is that if you just have a proxy or a cache that looks at your URL, which is the same for either JSON or XML or whatever format you like to have, or whatever language you like to have, the proper version, not these two here, but you do use the accept headers. If you only look at your URL, they'll be all the same. The difference is in the headers. Well, proxy servers usually don't care anything about what's in the headers. So you have to tell your proxy server, your caching mechanisms, okay, I have a different version for you. I can do different version for your MIME types in or accept. Or I have a typo here in an accept language. If you have different languages, you can tell your proxy server, okay, you ask for this URL, this resource with this URL, but I have a French version and a German version. So the moment your request comes back to your caching mechanisms, your server, your proxies, it will figure, oh, what, wait a minute, yes, I have to consider that I just got this response back, and the moment I get a new request, just check if it's the same header for your accept things, your accept headers and your response headers. So your content is being responded. So that's typical something that goes into your cache. The other one I have been working for, this is very raw at this moment, auth, and yes, I shortcut it for auth. We know it's about authentication and authorization. Again, HTTP, REST applications, they are stateless, and that means that your server should not know that you have logged in before. There's no way to have a key that you can transfer back and forth at the same time and know, oh yeah, I have used that key before, so it will be okay. Because you're building state into your server again, purely speaking. So you have to provide your credentials every time with every request. And luckily it has a small HTTP header field authentication, which will just tell you for which re-element it should be. Your username goes in it, your password goes in it, it's very small. POM has talked about it, others will have talked about it. It's not secure, but please use TLS or something like that. We're not going back in time. Well, speaking about going back in time, authorization, the headers you might have seen, the response code you might have seen before, a 401, it says not authorized, but actually a 401 should be a not authenticated one. They didn't care about writing proper specifications at that time. Luckily it's only a text that goes with the status code. And we have the 403, the forbidden one. That's actually saying you're not authorized to get into something. Resource access, you should consider role-based things. For you have a lot of people that can do specific stuff with your resources. Some people can get it. Most people can get to your resources, but you want limited access for people that want to update it with put or delete it. So use role-based access there. So, compared to the web, this is what the usual web applications will do. You will try to attempt some web page and it will tell you, so sorry, you're not authorized to get in here. We will route you to a login page and you will request to do your usual thing like register for this web site or login. Then it will go back to your server again. It will check if you're authenticated now, and if so, it will route you back to your original page and it will start up setting session cookies, etc., etc. This, however, is REST. You attempt to access some, well, I'll say some page, which should have said some resource, of course. Then it will tell you you might not be authenticated. Well, how does it say a client that you're not authenticated? It will send you the 401 not authorized. Then it will tell your client, okay, I need to provide some credentials. And it will send back that same request, but then including your credentials. It will check if you're authorized now. And if you're authorized, it will process your request. And if not, it will tell you 403 forbidden. That's how it should be. And I think most things will quite be all right here. Just the nasty thing, authorized and authentication. All right, whoever. This I wrote for Dancer to plug in HTTP auth extensible. Very easy to implement. It will do this here. If you have some specific resources you'd like to have authentication for, just put this in between your path and your sub, and it will do it for you. This is the role-based version, and if those examples might look a little bit common, they actually come from the Dancer Auth extensible. This is just the HTTP version of it. It has a config file, you can read along. HTTP authentication requires a realm. This realm is called example. It will have a provider config because we can have multiple providers for each realm. You can choose from this version a config. You can have LDAP authorizations, you can have DBI, and whatever is written in the normal Dancer 2 plugin Auth extensible. Just build on top of it. So, briefly back, authentication and HTTP APIs. If you are not authorized, you should return the www authenticate with it. I got in nice discussions with Raki from the Dancer core team. No, I don't want it. Yeah, sorry, it's not my idea of doing it, but that's what RFCs tell you to do. You will come back with a HTTP request header authorized with all the stuff in it, and if you're not authorized, it will show you back the forbidden. I'm working on a few plugins of the HTTP family. But before I continue, I should have got any questions about either Auth extensible or content negotiation. Clear so far? Okay. Dancer 2 plugin, HTTP content negotiation, and Auth extensible I already discussed. The next two, HTTP conditional, will be something likewise. You have seen for the examples, it will just make sure that you have provided the right things I talked a little bit earlier. It will check if you have your if unmatched or if matched or the if modified since or if unmodified since for the proper verbs in your methods for HTTP. It's useless to do the if unmodified since for a GET request. But it's very useful if you want to do something that's horrible bad, like a delete. So it will handle those things with the proper status codes. And of course it will do the HTTP cache as well, to make sure that any requests you make that can be cacheable will be handled there. It will do the 3 or 4 things if it has a resource that has not been updated, etc. They will be built on top of the HTTP header action pack. Action pack does a lot of useful stuff for you. So it keeps my own plugins very small. I'm missing something here. My text is gone. It would have said, damn it, Steven. The guy is very good in doing a lot of things, but like I said, you rely on people, their other stuff. And already I found 2 nasty bugs in what he wrote in Dave Rolski. Like the */ q is 0.0 means you do not want anything else. It just comes back with the first MIME type your server can support, even if your client doesn't like it. And the other thing, MIME types are supposed not to be case sensitive. If I check with a case sensitive accept header that comes back with capitals, and I run it through the HTTP header action pack, it will say, no, I don't know that one. So things to discuss with those guys, and we will solve them. No problem. If I have a little bit time left, I do. Yeah. I try to figure out all those routes you have to go through to do proper handling of HTTP requests. All those if then else things, all those status codes you have to work through, all those headers you have to go through. And I started thinking, oh, let's make a schema and let's try to do that and draw those things and all those. Somebody else must have been as stupid as I've been and tried to write a diagram. So yeah, I stumbled upon Bashu. He had a nice schema with all those conditions where you have to go through. You have shown the slide with all the things, isn't it? Yeah. A nice Ruby implementation. Stephen Little, Dave Rolski, they had a nice implementation of that. I have found some bugs in the Bashu schema, so I can't blame Steven here. You can forge routes through the schema that will end up in wrong decisions. So let's try to edit those things, and we will have a proper web machine. It's very nice. It takes you through all the steps of the decision tree. But on the other hand, it's not something that you would use inside the Dancer framework. So, I'm at the end of my presentation. I think I made it just in time. I have 1 minute left. Any questions? Not at all. Why no questions? I don't want to be clear. I want to be fake next time. So I hope you will find those things either on CPAN or in GitHub. They're very new. Like I said, I released the first plugin a week or two ago. The next one is only on GitHub at this moment. You can go there, and the rest will come soon enough. Thank you for your time.